Okay, so after having spent about 6 months trying to build a lot of packages in Haiku, and after having come across diverse issues that arise that could take place really in any environment, um, when you're trying to build a large number of packages, I'm going to talk about some of my recent experiences in the context of the current package manager that Haiku has, and Haiku Porter and the way it builds stuff. There was a recent discussion over the Haiku mailing list that I followed, and so besides being a little bit worn out, just because I'm tired anyway, I'm gonna try to wake up and talk about some stuff that happened as I remember it. So hopefully I'll remember this stuff. I think I do. And the last or the main thing that I'd come across was the main issue that I had, or the thing that I felt that was the main problem that's a piece of a problem with other things that happen, is the inability for the end user to path libraries on his own. That has an effect both on both applications that have been created in the past and applications that have yet to be created or being created as we speak now, or as I speak. Um, then there's the second issue that it became more apparent that it could be an issue when I downloaded and was successfully able to use both the X server and GIMP from the TiltOS website in my Haiku installation. I didn't build these things, but I think the movement of that software into the current environment does shed some light on some factors that relate to how a system should be set up to allow for various things to happen. Again, so we're making an operating system that we want to be able to accommodate various end user needs, but in a user friendly way. Okay. Now, what I'm going to describe about the way I got the GIMP from TiltOS, obviously, most people are not going to find the methodology as a user friendly methodology. However, if we suppose that actually, the TiltOS website at one point did have a method by which if you type box -i GIMP, it would automatically download the GIMP and install it on your system. That is now broken. But it's broken for reasons that really don't fall under the scope of the discussion. In fact, I would say that had the TiltOS website not replace the libraries and binaries that come with Haiku, and supposing that the GIMP would run just fine against the libraries and binaries provided by Haiku as of today, which I don't know, let's just assume that's true. that actually, no, it would not be able to install. The GIMP would not be able to install. Even though installing it will render your system unbootable. So I don't recommend using a current nightly to try to install TiltOS. Just make that clear. But you can manually download stuff, and I think I've already done a video on this. But that is an overall piece of the puzzle. Now I'm going to start out by talking about how there are two stages to an application operating. And I'm going to talk about both stages, and they're two separate stages. The first stage is just simply being able to find dependent libraries to be able to run at execution time. The second stage is after the application is executed, is it able to find other components that it needs? This could include configuration files, fonts, function calls from dbus, and the like. These are two separate things. What I'm going to focus on mostly is the first initial step that has everything to do with pathing. The pathing that the system provides. The second step isn't necessarily related to the pathing that the system provides. It is actually related to what the program has pathed within it, or the program's ability to use variables. Now, in both steps, there does exist technology by which to either have the system find additional components for the program to either launch or to operate properly. And there's also a way to embed those instructions within the program. Now, one thing that's of significance and importance to note is that at least the GIMP program did not have hard-coded paths embedded within it for finding libraries. So the GIMP downloaded from TiltOS could only rely on the system to be able to run. Initially, to launch, to find its dependent libraries and communicate with the dependent libraries. After it launched, at that point it did have embedded paths to find components that it needed to run, and that was to boot common. It did no longer exist. And the reason why you can't install anything from TiltOS I'm not really clear on that. It's not really significant to my argument. What's significant to the argument are not the actual instances of failure, but examples of them in a discussion of the technology behind it. For example, it doesn't matter what kind of car I drive to get to work, as long as there is a road that works, my car has tires in it, and the engine runs, and there's a sufficient supply of gasoline, I probably will be able to get to work every day. The way Haiku is designed is analogous to a road, tires, gasoline, me being able to see and not being blind, or whatever. All the factors that contribute to my ability to get from my home to my work in the morning. There are factors that contribute to a program's ability to run or not. Okay, so of the two, so if you build an application, and I'm not going to claim that it's voluntary, that you can just pick and choose whether you're going to embed hard-coded paths without doing significant, tedious, detailed work. But it is possible to have the outcome of a build of a binary that needs to call dependent libraries, or perhaps other binaries, to either have instructions embedded within the binary to find those dependent libraries or not. Under circumstance number one, there'll be a directory structure that basically says, I need the following libraries to run, and they're located over here. Go get them. So the runtime loader, I suppose, or whatever launches applications in Haiku, looks for the libraries in those particular places and acts to bridge, I suppose, the communication between those libraries and the binary. Something does, and then the program's able to launch. After the program launches, the instructions within the program itself may or may not need to have configuration settings, but for the purpose of meaningful discussion, we'll assume that the program does need to find configuration settings or perhaps other components from the system. In some instances, that also could be, those additional components could be called with variables. It says, hey system, go look in your temp place, wherever that is, and let me put a lock file there. Hey system, look in your settings folder, wherever that is, and let me have the settings. Or the program could be built to say, hey, my settings are over here, go get them in that directory right over there. It's right over there. Well, if the program that launches, of course, if the directory structure changes from when the program was first created, that is, boot common no longer exists, then when the program goes to look inside of that directory and can't find the files, it'll error in some fashion. However, if there are variables in there, in the program, then it'll look in the right place, wherever that is. So for example, in Samba 3.5, the program wants to be able to have write access to whatever the system temp directory is. I haven't been able to find that code in Samba. But I'm not a pro coder either, but I think it would be kind of hard to find. But anyway, it exists in that way. But if they had decided instead, this third-party app that I attempted to port over to Haiku, if they had decided on their own to hardcode the path, I would be charged with grepping through the source code to find that hard-coded path and convert it into something, the variable that B wants, that Haiku wants, if I was able to do that. Let's assume a porter is going to know how to do that. Okay. Here's the deal. Oh yeah, let's go back. Okay, so we have we have the launch stage, we have the post-launch stage, we have the settings. They can be variables in either case. Now getting back to the GIMP, where it had no hard-coded paths at all. In Haiku, in that instance, there's no hard-coded paths. To get the GIMP to run, what I have to do is place the libraries in boot, home, config, non-packaged, and library. Okay, that's all fine and dandy. But that is a hard-coded path, by the way. So if someone was packaging repackaging packages for TiltOS. Let me think about this. I think they would only have one choice. They would only have one choice, and that is to place the library or binary in boot home config non-packaged library or binary. Okay, now the system. Now, let's back up though. I understand how the system is able to, when there's in the launch stage, when there's no hard-coded paths embedded in the binary, I know how the system is able to find the libraries it needs so long as they're in the right place. That's called pathing. Haiku system is unique in that it doesn't allow the end user to add his or her own paths to Haiku. What it does do is it allows the end user to only have one place by which to put that path, those binaries, if they're built without a hard-coded path. That is boot home config non-packaged. Library, binary, etc. Okay. There really are only a couple other locations on the system by which, if the end user places libraries or binaries within it, that it is able to be run and work properly without the hard-coded path in it. I'm not certain how what's called a Haiku package is able to write to all those directories. I'm not saying that they're unable to. I'm not saying they are able to. We'll leave that open, and maybe we can assume that it could. Now, the way Haiku Porter works, and there's more complications to just the running. There's also the building of the package that also enters into this. I'm going to talk about running of packages right now. The way Haiku Porter works is it will embed a hard-coded path into the binary so that it'll find the library that it needs when it runs. I don't know, and I haven't really seen patches in Haiku Porter. I'm not an expert at all the patches of Haiku Porter. I will say that I've yet to find patches in Haiku Porter that redirect or that wants to use certain directories within Haiku. System directories, system temp, system var, let's patch this so we change it so it doesn't want to look at, and Haiku has unique variable names. It's like beef, it's like find directory. I guess if I could open this thing up to look, I could do that. Another thing that's going on is I think there's not a lot of people that are all that well versed in it, and I'm getting the feeling that the people that are most versed on this they think they have everything figured out, but in practice it doesn't really work all that well because of other factors that they haven't considered. I think it's unfortunate. So let's just take a look. I think I remember boot system settings. Where is it? Headers. Private. What's this? By the time I find this file, find it by name. I'll lose my audience, but basically, I don't know where the hell it is. There is a folder called Find Directory with variables, and they have a bunch of B's in front of them. Okay. I don't think any of the other Unixes out there are going to have B's in front of them. So what does that mean? That means if there isn't code, if there's code to automatically find, at least it seems it means this. It may not mean this, because Samba certainly was able to find the temp directory. So maybe it does mean that it could find it. Maybe there's some other header that translates the normal Unix stuff into the B stuff. But basically, that could be done. Okay. But not very easily when you're porting over code you're not familiar with, and especially not easy if it's because we don't have the normal Unix. We don't have the usual, is a better way to put it, instead of normal Unix directory layout for the most part. Well, we do have a temp equivalent. We do have a var equivalent. We don't have a user equivalent. That's where most of the issues come about. The developers have decided we're not going to have a user equivalent. Okay, fine. That's just one more set of patching that needs to be done. But actually, I really don't think there's a lot of patching that needs to be done for post-launch hard-coded paths. But pre-launch hard-coded paths, and even pathing that's included in installers, and I have no experience with installer-based pathing to variable-based system directories. I don't know how that works. But that would be a factor of this discussion. That did come up also. But sticking with just these two different things, the one thing I want to focus on that I know the most about has to do with the launch time pathing. Okay. Is there a path embedded in the binary or not? And did that path survive? And if it didn't survive, what could be done about it? And what's the impact on the end user? What is the impact on the end user? What seems to happen in Haiku a lot with the developers is they'll talk about in terms about how they want things to be built and how they envision it as being perfect. So let's talk about Haiku Porter. So when Haiku Porter builds an application, it'll embed a path inside of it that includes a separate path for each library with a version number that's attached to it that you cannot predict. So you would not be able to use the system pathing mechanism to path the libraries because you can't predict what the path will be. As much as I'm aware. Now, if variables can be put in pathing, that would be very interesting, very nice to have. But because of the way we have things arranged, with the packages first, .self second, the name of the library with the version number after that, and then library, that's 2 directories down. You can't do a predictable pathing for that. You'd have to have a variable in one place. You'd have a variable in one. I don't even know if that would even work. So, because of that limitation in pathing, the creators of Haiku Porter envisioned that every binary that was built would have a hard-coded path within it that would point to the exact library or directory that was built with the package. And if you're only building a few packages, that works. However, over time, if you as the end user don't know that it's probably not a good thing if you remove an earlier version of the library, because you might break the binary, because the binary is going to look for a specific directory as where to find its dependent library. And if it doesn't, it just says, sorry, the library isn't there and you can't run it. So, the initial result is good, but then things go bad when things change. But it could work out. But it can be very tedious. Not all the packages, when you just download source code from a project and you try to build it, it doesn't always build with a hard-coded path in it. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And the times it doesn't, you have to take action in an environment that doesn't have a pathing mechanism that you can adjust on your own. You actually have to edit the source code so that the path will show up in the binary, hard-coded. Unless, of course, you plan on putting the package in boot home config non-package. The one that you'd probably never want to do in Haiku, at least at this stage, and at least by the way the developers are talking, is to embed boot home config non-package bin or library or anything like that in your binary. Because if that nomenclature changes for packages that you're distributing to other people, your installation mechanism could fail at that point, perhaps. Unless there's some kind of variable for that. Put this package in wherever Haiku says is the place it should go, right? For Haiku Porter stuff, I'm not so sure if you could put those binaries and libraries into boot config non-package and have it end up running. Anyway, so what ends up happening is as these choices were made to limit the directories that were available, installers that used to work don't work anymore. And as far as I could tell, these changes weren't really necessary for Haiku Porter to work. Haiku Porter basically, and Haiku Depot, the package manager, wants to have a slice of the hard disk to put its stuff. Now, really, honestly, in my opinion, the build will work initially. Over time, I think it's subject to break. And there's another issue that's going on that I haven't even discussed. So you could actually build something in Haiku Porter, and it could actually require that you build, say, a library n curses, I don't know, let's make up a number, 1.15. Okay. So it'll hard code in the binary a path to packages.self n curses 1.15, that's the number I used, library, and then it'll have lib n curses.so in there. And the path in the binary will definitely look there. However, if the compiler during the linking stage obeys the pathing that's in the system, and you're not able to change the source code to be absolutely certain that the binary that you're building will link with the same library that's embedded, that will end up being embedded in it. And yes, it's possible that can happen because I've seen it happen in this system. Then the binary you're building will actually link with Haiku's native version of the library, the n curses that comes with Haiku. And if that differs than the version of the n curses that you built with Haiku Porter, the only good that the library that you built with Haiku Porter does for you is the fact that it's there. But it actually, and it'll allow your stuff to run if there isn't enough difference between the n curses that ship with Haiku and the n curses that builds with Haiku Porter. And if there are enough differences, you get unresolved symbols, and this does happen. And people wonder, why is this happening? Well, it has to do with the compiler tool. And so for things to actually work out in the manner envisioned by the people that created Haiku Porter, the source code has to be significantly modified to the point where it's going to link with the library in the place that Haiku Porter has placed the library. And that it is the same place as the R path that will be embedded inside the binary. If it doesn't, you can get unresolved symbols. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. I suspect that there are issues, definitely going to be issues, with Mesa builds using Haiku Porter. In my experience, and even having used the make files from Haiku's Git repository to build Mesa, it still built a Mesa that resulted in unresolved symbols when I tried to run libraries against it. If I didn't have Haiku's Mesa in the system, the program simply wouldn't link because of unresolved symbols. The only reason why, in my experience, any program that's graphical will link with Mesa, library, that's library GL, is because it is actually linking with the native Mesa that comes with Haiku. And if in the binary that you build has a hard-coded path to library Mesa, it'll probably end up coming out with unresolved symbols. Unless there's some magic that's being done with Haiku Porter, and I doubt it, that allows it to build Mesa the same kind of mesa with the same kind of symbols as what comes stock with Haiku. Or enough of them. So the problem that the Haiku Porter people are going to have is not only if the old version of the library is removed and the library is no longer present to link with, because the end user took action to remove the old library, because they thought, oh good, I'm going to upgrade my stuff. Let's get rid of this old cruft and keep the new stuff. When the binary tries to run, it won't find the old library because it'll have a new, different number attached to it. It'll be library and curses 1.20 versus 1.15, but the embedded path in the binary is packages.self and curses.1.15/lib, LIB. So you got a broken package. Now, the package manager may warn you about that when you try to remove the Haiku package from the folder inside your home directory. So that may cover that, but it seems like that seems to be a problem. Other people are reporting that that is a problem. And I believe that when the person that said that was a problem is a problem, I believe that it is a problem. However, when you get a mismatch between the linker and what the binary runs against, which doesn't happen in a lot of systems because a lot of systems don't have basically two places for libraries to go. So they don't have this problem, but it exists. It's a stealth problem. They just don't know it exists. That is to say, in package source especially, I would build Billiard. It would embed a path to try to run Mesa out of boot home package library, when in fact the building mechanism linked with a library in boot system library, which is library Mesa, library GL. That's one that I knew of. So there are exceptions. So what I'm saying is that even though, so now it gets tedious. The problem is that this gets too tedious. So you have, first of all, there's, time will only tell that after someone takes the time to go through the source code to make sure that when this builds, when this links, it's going to link with the Haiku Porter library and not the system library. And then when this runs, it's going to link with the Haiku Porter library and not the system library. Those are two different sets of potential patches that have to be done. And that doesn't even include patching for the other differences that have to do with either porting the app due to system differences, header differences, or making changes to code to conform to Haiku's unique identity, i.e. that it doesn't have a user directory or some other directory that other systems have. Some packages may expect etc. to be at the root. Whatever. Just mentioning possibilities, but when you have a 11,000 package base that random, every once in a while, there'll be a problem where a patch is necessary just for the etc. directory, or just for the user directory, or just for the var directory, or just for the temp directory, to catch my drift. What I don't think the developers have is hands-on experience building a lot of packages. So they think in terms of what's possible. But anyway, it's hard enough to get something to, well, put this way. I would say that, okay, so when we're dealing with POSIX applications, I would say, and I've said this before, without making any changes to any of the source code, Haiku will build about 30% of anything you attempt. You have a 3 in 10 chance 2 to 3 in 10 chance. It will just build. You just download the source code for something from somewhere that's POSIX. Try to build it. It will build. 3 out of 10 times. However, I can't put a number on it. Let's say, well, maybe. Okay, from the games, out of the 170 some odd games that I'd built, it was less than 25% that I could actually use for one reason or the other. Okay? Some of it has to do with system limitations. Okay, so the ones that didn't work are all candidates for being patched further so that they do work. You get it? Okay, so we're talking 25% of 30%. So it has about a Haiku at this to start with has about a 7 to 8% successful build rate. You'll build it successfully and it'll work right without patching. Okay, so we're talking about 90, over 95. Is that 95? Between 90 and 95% of the packages that anybody wants to build in Haiku is going to have to be patched either so it'll build or so it'll run right, given the differences in the system. And I'm not talking, when I say run right, I'm not talking about R paths or nothing. That's not even, you're not even at the R path yet. Whether you make sure the R path is embedded in there or not. And I'm not even talking about whether there's the differences of linkage. You've linked with boot system, the library and boot system library, but it wants to run against the Mesa library that's in packages.self Mesa, whatever number it is, library. There's a difference, you get unresolved symbols. It's what happens. There's enough of a difference. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes things will run just fine. You linked against one library over here and you're using a library over there, it'll work. Of course, I don't think that's what the people that made Haiku envisioned. So to get that kind of precision, actually, get a ton of patching, and then we got to make recipes on top of that. And then the versions change. The environment changes. The one thing that is able to stand change in a lot of instances, at least with the initial application launching stage, is the end user's ability to path stuff. And that involves the ability to edit. If Haiku had the ability, it would involve the ability to edit a text file called .profile and to add a line that says $path equals and then the place where you want to find your libraries. And sometimes these things get huge. Okay, whatever, doesn't matter. Installers can add these things. So if we had a system by which people could we had write access to the system, and it can create the directories that we want to create. The installer can create the directory it wants to create and add the path to the .profile. There is no reason, why an application can't withstand the kind of change that took place with Haiku Porter, except for the fact that it made part of the system read only. If it didn't make part of the system read only, there shouldn't be any reason why an installer can't be made to deal with the differences over time. But since pathing's broken, and there's only, now we're told we have to put our stuff in one place, in a place that didn't exist at the time that all these packages were made and put up at Haiku Porter. It makes it absolutely impossible that any application would continue to run. At least any application that would require, you'd have to be psychic. You'd have to predict that 2 to 3 years down the road, someone would decide that the packages you needed to use were going to go into boot home config non-packaged library or binary. I am very interested to find that header. Now the only thing that's going in the back of my mind, well, perhaps there are actually variables that have always existed in the system that if they decide to call it boot home package elephant, that you'd be able to install stuff, right? If the installer had a variable, and that would translate by the system to the right place. Really want to look around here. It's in here. It's right here. It's locale. Oh my god. Wait. I think I know what to do. Support. private system directories. Okay, and this is one of two of them. Christ. All right, so basically, if you provide that variable to a package, the package will try to use the bin directory, and this can change. The people that have made Haiku Porter decide that they're not going to use bin, but instead they're going to use binary, because they think it's more user-friendly or whatever. They can. If you wrote your code to use kglobal bin directory, it'll find wherever the bin directory of the day app actually is. Let's see. The question is, I guess the question is whether other POSIX apps are using these variables. If not, then you gotta figure out what variable that would be for the package you're making for whatever system it was made for, and change that variable to this variable. So you have to know about the other stuff for this to work, I suppose. Now, this could be only just a function of the installation process. I'm not sure. I'm not going to speak from, I'm not going to say I know this. I swear to God there was another, here's something called paths. BSD directory. Why is that in private? Private to me kind of implies it shouldn't be used. Let's see, headers. Now this BSD directory normally is not. Oh boy. We don't have a user directory. So, yeah, right. We don't, yeah, so we don't have a user directory. Oh boy. So anyway, I don't think that one's being used. Okay. But if there happens to be code with a paths.h, this is actually, it will be found by the compiler. It's defined for the compiler's purposes. Something can go wrong there. I'll just say that. That really needs to be modified, I would say. Getting back to this. So this is basically saying, and you know what? Sambo is able to find this. Boot system cache temp. I didn't make any changes to Samba, so it was able to be found. But the problem is that you just don't know. And that kind of stuff, you know, I'd have to know more about coding to know whether it would be adequate to just search for that variable, ksystem temp directory, and know that no matter where I search for it or not, it was going to find whatever this program was going to treat as a temp directory. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But now we're getting into some pretty tedious patching. We have patching for headers. We have all these things add up, and then sometimes you just try to download the source code, you can't unzip it because we don't support hard links. Sometimes the headers will clash. I don't know what to do about that. We have, anyway. So, getting back to the main story, I guess, because it's an extraordinarily complicated subject. This the problem is that we made sure that we did stuff to make sure that in theory our stuff worked. We just broke everything else, and we just didn't care about fixing it for anybody. We didn't think about it. As long as our system from now on works forward, screw everything else. That's the message that I get. And that and the same stance is made. We're still in alpha. We can decide to change everything again. So that message just basically tells the entire community that don't build anything now because why bother? They may just change it again. And it's because we've probably, I don't know why we have the pathing the way we have it, but we're probably doing it to accommodate something. Maybe it's the ability for PE to run. Maybe we had to have that so PE would run. I'll give up PE in a second to have write access to the system, or to be able to path my own libraries. The only thing that's really going to be able to withstand change. So, for example, the packages that are built by Haiku Porter, if at some stage we decide that we don't want to call our packages directory packages but something else, maybe pkgs, all the stuff we've built now isn't going to translate and be able to be used later because we don't have write access to the, oh, well, we won't change it. Well, really? We added boot common and we changed it. There's no Garrett, so from the developer's point of view, it doesn't make any sense. But if the developer could path his own libraries, he wouldn't care what the hell you did. Just as long as he didn't build something that wanted to install to a place where he wouldn't have write access to after you change stuff. But that's it. Everything would work if we were actually able to path our stuff. Some people did make changes to the system. They modified headers or other things that are involved in the build process but not in the running process. And that's why having write access to the system was important to them. In one case, TiltOS namely, the way that he dealt with the fact that some things weren't linking is he decided he would just build those things himself. Build his packages and make sure they link against those libraries, and then make sure that he distributed those libraries or replaced the libraries that Haiku came with his, and he made sure that at the time the system still booted. Well, that doesn't work anymore, of course. Most of the system is read-only, but it actually didn't stand the test of time. And what prompted that is a completely different problem, and that's the problem with, I believe we have with the linker. I think we have a problem with the linker. I don't know what it is, other than it is building some libraries that just will not link because all they'll produce are undefined references. I don't know why that is, but it's happening. It's happening with Mesa. Well, just build a static library. Well, okay. The other thing is that just do this, just do that. Well, you should have done this, you should have done that, you should have walked down the type rope this way, you should have walked down the type. That's not user-friendly. A user-friendly system is actually able to accommodate for various use cases. And so you want to plan in that fashion. Now, getting back to this whole discussion, this doesn't mean that Haiku Porter needs to be torn down. But what I do think Haiku Porter needs to do, actually, is build the libraries and just have your own change root under packages. Packages library, packages binary. Well, you can't have two. Yeah, you can. I have two installations of Python on my system now, for example. And the Python library is libpython version number.so. You can path that. If PE is the reason why we do not have pathing, just get rid of it. I know people like PE better, but just get rid of it. Because PE doesn't make up for all the things we can't build. Or maybe find to put PE in its own little jail. You know, there are some ELF utilities that'll actually let you change the content. Then that way, but when you look at makefiles, when packages go to link, it's got like minus library network, minus L network. It doesn't have minus L network number. It just has minus L network. So you have two libraries in there. I don't know which one it's going to pick when it links up with the next one anyway. And most systems don't really, it's pretty uncommon to have two libraries of the same name but of different versions. It's really, really rare, even in a Linux system. And when it does happen, they just attach a number to the library name. But the main issue really is the pathing. You won't have to stick RPaths in everything you build, which is just too much patching. I'm sorry. There's already too much patching. If you are able to actually path the stuff you build with Haiku Porter. Well, it's not as exact. Who cares? So what? It's going to look in some other directories. Eventually it's going to find the one that you want. And in some cases, I don't think it makes any sense at all to build libraries that you already have in the system. That creates the opportunity to have unresolved symbols. Just saying. And it happens with zlib too, and that's pretty major. Link with one zlib, try to run against the other. Unresolved symbols. There you go. That happened with me also. Probably would be a good idea to use these variables whenever you can when you build stuff. But to say that people should have done that the whole time is just ridiculous. The assumption is that most of the time people are going to have write access to their system and be able to create directories when they need them and add pathing when they need them, and those two very crucial elements are gone. And so it makes the system unable to accommodate various variables that are thrown at it, and that's what needs to be fixed. No one really wants Haiku Porter to disappear, or Haiku Depot. It's a very nice system. But if you think about it, you also want it to work over the long run. And I think there are some issues with having a separate change root in the first place. Things should just install to the same place that everything else is. Really, that's my honest to God opinion. Most of the stuff should be built up at Haiku. You want people building stuff in a rare instance. That's my opinion. Okay, but to have a healthy actually, the other thought with that thought is that to have a healthy, vibrant operating system, you need a lot of third-party people making apps for your system that'll work. That they don't have to make a recipe file for if they don't want to. And that the packaging is relatively simple so they could, you know, it doesn't have to be a work of engineering. Or if it has to be a work of engineering, that work of engineering be something that's created for the packager rather than automatically by use of computers, rather than people having to perform computer-like tasks. And I'm talking about the recipes. So anyway, so what's the problem that's happening right now? There are apps that are broken. There's no way to restore them unless you rebuild them, and it's too much to ask. So we have a standoff, and there isn't much progress. And the people that are working on Haiku Porter, there are going to be some frustrations. The people that don't just go, oh my god, and they walk away. Maybe they won't bring it up. Some people will. Oh, I'm getting unresolved symbols. Sometimes they're going to get unresolved symbols. Sometimes they won't. And it's going to be hard to tell what the cause is. Is it because of two libraries that were built with symbols in them that work okay or not? Or is it something wrong with the linker? It's already tough enough as it is to patch for this system because our headers are mostly, from my opinion, they're mostly complete, but they're not complete enough, especially for the graphical programs. Our headers are missing variables that graphical programs require, such as sun lens, and there's some things we're just having to change and sub out for silly reasons because, you know, it's not in the POSIX book. Who cares? You know, it's our own operating system. The headers are there to help us build things. They're not there to please the POSIX people. It works the other way around. I've already talked about this. So it's already a formidable task. If anybody's built anything for BOS, it's because they have their desire to see Haiku succeed is greater than the difficulties that go with building stuff for an environment that is different than other environments. It's just a fact of life. It's not like, it doesn't mean that Haiku's bad, or, you know, I'm saying Haiku's a piece of crap because it isn't like other environments. You know, and the people that respond to these things usually respond as if that's being said. It's not. It's just the state of way things are. Haiku has its own identity, so it's, you know, whether we have a user directory or not, or a temp directory or not, or we have our headers in a certain place, it's part of Haiku's identity to a certain degree. So, you know, that's what we patch for until it gets to the point where we're just patching repetitively for no reason. And that's where header redirects would come in, but I've talked about this till turn blue in the face. It probably never happened. It's only when it's inconvenient for the developers that it actually happens, which gives the impression to everybody that, you know, the developers are off in their own world, and hopefully, luckily, they'll come our way someday. But I don't know if that day's ever going to happen, and time's passing. By come our way, I mean the end users are actually able to use apps because the developers are actually able to actually make these apps. Now, if Haiku Porter works for you, great. But some people don't want to do that. And the ones that weren't built in Haiku from before, they still have value. The GIMP still has value. The X server still has value. They may still fit a need to someone now until we can build it ourselves. And until we can build it ourselves, those things have value. But we've cut that value off for the end user, so we're kind of starving from both ends. We have no relief from what we've done before, and we have no prospect of improving in the future. And the system is so regimentedly tight that if you built an app, you have to put it in this directory Oh no, so the example for the GIMP, the first thing I have to do is figure out, does this particular binary have a hard-coded path in it? Okay, it does, doesn't. Okay, if it does, then, you gotta create the directory for it. Hope it's not in the read-only area if you're screwed anyway, but if it doesn't, then you can go ahead and put it in there. Meanwhile, an application like the GIMP won't even build in Haiku because Haiku doesn't have shared memory. It's clear that was built in some other system. It was cross-compiled. But if it doesn't have the hard-coded path, you got to put it in boot home package and on. Then you can do readelf. Okay, it's looking for these libraries. Okay, is it in this system? Oh, it's not. Okay, let's go get it. Let's download. Let's unzip it. And I did a whole video on that. It took a couple hours just to try to get kwrite to work, and then it had the unresolved symbol problem. Oh, okay. And that's because, well, I'd have to take one of the Tilt OS libraries and plunk it at ours because something has happened. And now our linker doesn't, or the code change, who knows, right? It's pretty clear there is something going on with the linker, but it isn't clear whether in that instance it's because the symbols in the code, it's a different version. I have to have a different version of the library over here. How would I do it? And then the library is going to be, the name of the library is always going to be embedded in that binary. There's going to be problems in the entire whole Unix thing with that. So you got to rename the library, basically. If a program is looking for a particular library, for a particular name and version, then you have to actually rename the newer version to the older version, or it won't work. And that's still a crapshoot because the symbols could have changed. Okay. But we're trying to, I would think that we're not just trying to only care about, the people that use this operating system are more important than the idea of what's technically correct. Usability is more important than the idea of what is technically correct. I want to know that every time that someone talks about, this package that's built in Haiku Porter, that always linked with library version blah blah blah, so we'll know exactly how to deal with it. It's not always going to be that way. It doesn't have to be that tightly regimented. The problems aren't that numerous between one version of a library or the other, and there are other ways to figure out what version of the library it actually is. Just look in the package list. It doesn't have to be named in the directory or something. But without the pathing and without the write access, those are the main issues. The end result, one of the end results, is that the old packages aren't going to work anymore. They would otherwise work. That we could be able to accommodate, but we just are choosing not to. The suggestion that I have for Haiku Porter, though, is in general, it doesn't really matter if it's in packages or blah, 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 or even where you drop stuff now after the package is built. That isn't really a problem. The problem basically is the way it's pathed with a variable, and the only way you can do it is with the hard-coded path. There's nothing really wrong with hard-coded path. It's really a development choice. The second problem you're going to have with Haiku Porter is that not everything is going to build with the libraries that you have in Haiku Porter. It's not always going to link with the libraries you built in Haiku Porter. It might run with the library you built in Haiku Porter. It's not always going to link with it. Conversely, it might link with it but not run against it. Unless, of course, the hard-coded path's in there, but it's not always going to embed the hard-coded path. Unless you do something to the source code. So you got people to conform to the idea to get to both link and run. There's a lot of tedious code looking and a lot of tedious patching that really isn't worth it when a pathing mechanism already exists and has existed for a long time, and most of the other systems use it and they don't have a lot of problems with their applications at runtime. It takes a number of years until finally something doesn't work anymore, such as word perfect. And that's not always the case. So that's what I have to say about this issue. This whole thing about this, to me, strikes me as being post-application execution variables, aka the hard-coded paths. Just because you have used the case system etc. directory variable in your code doesn't mean, that when you launch your program. Actually, let's find the library. I'm sure there's probably this library directory. That variable there, kuser lib directory, has nothing to do with how an application finds its library when it's first launched. If you can't get past the launch stages, well, all I'm talking about today, for the most part. I've glossed over the other things I don't know much about. But if you can't even get past the initial launching stage, it's game over. Getting the GIMP to work over it that I downloaded from Tilt OS had everything to do with the initial launch stage. That is the problem. That's why stuff is broken over at Haikuware. It's not because they didn't use the variable kuser lib directory. Okay, that doesn't come up until after the program is launched and all the dependent libraries are found. So no, there's no such thing as this properly built package before. Either the package is built to be able to rely on the system providing the same paths that existed 5 years ago, or you hard-coded the path. Well, if the pathing is changed, you removed the directory from the system, and you made parts of the system read-only so they couldn't be written to, there has to be some, the only non-hard-coded pathway to do stuff would be to, then you'd have to put it in boot home config non-path. Well, that's a manual pain in the ass. The installer from 5 years ago wasn't going to precognitively predict. Now maybe down here's boot home config. Okay, maybe this is used in installers. When was this written? 2011. Okay, it's a complete farce. It's a falsehood to claim that, at least if this is the header that provides the variables that people are talking about for installers. Okay, if this is the header, and you're supposed to use this klib directory to ensure, it's from 2011 forward that the package would continue to work, because these variables didn't exist prior to 2011. So there's no way the people that made all that stuff over at Haikuware was going to be able to embed variables that didn't exist yet into their code. So nothing is going to survive that change to package management. I mean, I don't see multiple. I only see one copyright date, 2011. But it's absolutely pointless to claim whether someone could have coded something the right way or not. The point is, the end users want to use applications and they can't. And is it going to break the system if we make those applications usable or not? And if it's not going to break the system to make those applications usable, then change the system so the applications can be usable. It's a no-brainer. Whether you think shoulda, coulda, woulda back then, or they should have been psychic or whatever the fuck it is, it has nothing to do with your end users. The end users have a system they want to use, and they're contributing towards that, and they have. Yeah, I do realize some people there are volunteers. Just because you're volunteer doesn't mean you get to piss on the, I'm a volunteer blood person, but, people want to have blood after this disaster. They have to hike up to the top of the hill. You know, and if they don't do it, oh, okay, well, we're volunteers too. You know, it's just nonsense. You know, either you're making something for people to use or you're not. It's that simple. That's all I have to say about the subject.